At 16:45 hours on March 5, 1942, the cold wind swept across the deck of USS Atik as Lieutenant Commander Harry Linwood Hicks stepped aboard at Portsmouth Navy Yard in Kittery, Maine. He stood quietly for a moment, taking in the sight of the ship that would soon be his responsibility. She was a relic from another era, a 30-year-old steamer built for slow cargo runs, not war. Her hull showed streaks of rust, her paint was worn, her engine could barely muster 9 knots. To the untrained eye, she looked like nothing more than a tired merchantman limping back into usefulness. Hicks knew better. Beneath her weathered exterior, hidden behind false bulkheads and disguised panels, were 4 4-inch naval guns, 8 machine guns, depth charge projectors, and cargo holds filled with pulpwood designed to keep her afloat after a torpedo strike. Atik was no freighter at all. She was a Q-ship, a floating trap built to deceive German submarine commanders into surfacing, closing in for the kill, and exposing themselves to sudden, point-blank counterfire. She was known publicly as SS Vil Franca of Portuguese registry. But in truth, she was one of the most secret tools the United States possessed during the brutal early months of the Atlantic War. The idea for Q-ships had come not from daring tacticians, but from desperation. President Franklin Roosevelt had casually suggested the concept to Admiral Ernest King on January 19, 1942, as German U-boats continued to tear Allied shipping apart faster than America could protect it. King interpreted the comment as a directive. Within weeks, he quietly authorized the conversion of 5 civilian vessels. There were no press releases, no public records. The entire program was hidden behind a wall of secrecy so tight that not even standard Navy requisitions could trace the money. Workers at Portsmouth tore open decks, installed gun mounts, built collapsible panels, and concealed weapons with astonishing speed. In just 3 weeks, the old steamers were transformed into decoys meant to bleed the U-boat menace dry. But everyone involved knew the truth. These ships were slow. Their armor was non-existent. Their crews were green. Their odds were terrible. By the time Atik prepared for her first patrol, German U-boats had unleashed a nightmare along the American coastline. Operation Drumbeat had begun in January 1942, and within weeks tankers and freighters were burning within sight of vacation beaches. Cities refused blackouts because they worried about tourism revenue. Navigation lights glowed like beacons. Ships sailed alone and fully illuminated, following predictable routes as though peace still reigned. It was a hunter's paradise. Between January and March, German submarines sank 137 Allied ships in American waters while civilians watched the destruction from boardwalks and beaches. Oil slicks washed ashore. Bodies drifted in. The U-boat captains called it the second happy time, and to them, America had never looked more naive. Still, the Navy hoped these disguised vessels could change something. USS Eagle, the smallest Q-ship, sailed first. She found nothing, broke down repeatedly, and eventually was withdrawn. USS Asterion, Atik's sister ship, followed soon after. She patrolled hard, but like Eagle, she encountered no submarines. USS Bighorn lasted 6 weeks on station and saw not a single U-boat. The Germans had learned from World War I and were wary of lone merchantmen that behaved a little too perfectly. The trap simply wasn't working. But Hicks believed in the mission. A career officer from South Carolina and a Naval Academy graduate of 1928, he was quiet, disciplined, and respected. He had spent years on destroyers and cruisers, mastering naval gunnery and tactics. He trained his men relentlessly in the 3 weeks before deployment, rehearsing the dropping of the false panels, the quick firing of the hidden guns, and the silence required when playing dead. His crew was young, mostly in their 20s, some barely older than boys. They knew they were sailing straight into danger, and yet they boarded Atik willingly. On the afternoon of March 23, 1942, Atik eased away from Portsmouth. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and as she passed the breakwater she looked exactly as intended. Old, slow, harmless. The crews who worked on her conversion watched from shore, knowing their craftsmanship would soon face the ultimate test. None of them would ever forget that moment. 3 nights later, Atik was alone roughly 300 miles east of Norfolk, Virginia, moving steadily through moderate seas beneath an overcast sky. At the same hour, a gray shape stalked her from below. U-123, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Reinhard Hartigen, was on his second Atlantic patrol. Hartigen, just 29 years old, was already one of Germany's most skilled submarine captains. He had sunk 9 ships on his previous missions and had been awarded the Knight's Cross. He and his crew were confident. Their orders were simple: conserve torpedoes, use deck guns whenever possible, and keep the pressure on the panicked American coast. At 1,700 hours, his lookout spotted smoke. Through his binoculars, Hartigen saw an old steamer, unescorted, slow, and seemingly defenseless. Perfect prey. He shadowed her for hours, waiting until darkness masked his approach. At 1937, he surfaced and fired a single electric torpedo. It struck beneath Atik's bridge with a violence that shook the night. Fire poured from her cargo holds. Men ran on deck. A lifeboat splashed into the water. Everything Hartigen saw matched his expectations. Another helpless freighter. A clean kill. But Harry Hicks had been waiting for that moment. As U-123 maneuvered to finish the job, Atik suddenly came alive. Panels crashed down. Guns swung outward. Machine guns erupted in flashes of light. The first salvo fell short, the second wide, but the sudden eruption of fire stunned the German crew. Rounds pinged across the conning tower. One gunner hit Fähnrich zur See Rudolf Halser, the midshipman on watch, who collapsed with a mortal wound. Hartigen reacted instantly, ordering full speed and an emergency dive as shells exploded around his submarine. The Q-ship had revealed its teeth too quickly, firing before the German vessel was fully exposed. Still, the surprise had nearly worked. U-123 disappeared beneath the waves, battered but alive. Now the hunter became cautious. He circled underwater, probing for weaknesses. Atik burned in the darkness, her crew struggling to fight fires and maintain power. At 21:29, Hartigen launched a second torpedo. It slammed into Atik's engine room, killing the boilers and sealing her fate. The lights went dark. Her engine died. She began to settle by the bow, drifting helplessly. Hours passed. Hartigen waited, watching as lifeboats launched and men abandoned ship for real this time. The sea was turning savage, the wind rising. Just after 22:50, a final explosion ripped through Atik. A fireball lit the sky, debris rained down, and when the glow faded, the ship was gone. Every man aboard, 141 Americans, perished. Whether killed by the blast or swept away in the storm that followed, none survived to tell the story. The search began at dawn. An army bomber flew for hours and found nothing but empty ocean. USS Noah and USS Sagamore battled towering seas, discovering scattered debris, then nothing at all. 3 days later, 5 lifeboats were found drifting 80 miles from the site. They were empty. Those tiny boats were the last tangible evidence that Atik and her crew had ever existed. Germany, however, knew the truth almost immediately. Radio Berlin announced that a heavily armed Q-ship had been destroyed after a fierce duel. They had known about the American program all along. They had been warned that suspicious merchantmen might carry concealed guns. The element of surprise, Q-ship's only weapon, had evaporated before the first patrol even began. Admiral King was furious. The program he had created under pressure had led to the deaths of 141 sailors and achieved nothing. No U-boat had been sunk. Conversions, training, secrecy, $500,000 worth, had vanished into the Atlantic along with USS Atik. Within weeks, he halted all Q-ship operations. Asterion was recalled. Big Horn was reassigned. Eagle and Captor were removed from special duty. The Navy realized that elaborate traps were not the answer to the U-boat threat. Air patrols, radar, convoy escorts, destroyer escorts, these were the tools that would finally turn the tide. And remarkably, they did. By May 1942, U-boat losses began to rise sharply. In June, they rose higher. By July, German submarines were being destroyed faster than they could inflict meaningful damage. The U-boat campaign off America's coast collapsed. Operation Drumbeat, once the most successful German offensive in the Atlantic, came to an end. Reinhard Hartigen completed his patrols, received oak leaves to his Knight's Cross from Adolf Hitler himself, and then left frontline service. He survived the war, one of the few U-boat aces who did. But USS Atik and her crew never returned. Their sacrifice remains little known, overshadowed by larger battles and louder stories. Yet their mission, impossible though it was, came at a moment when America desperately needed every effort, every idea, every experiment to hold back a relentless enemy. They sailed into the teeth of the danger with courage, discipline, and faith in a plan that offered them almost no chance of survival. Their loss is a reminder of the hidden costs of innovation in wartime and the quiet bravery of sailors whose names rarely appear in history books. Tonight, the Atlantic rolls quietly over the place where Atik vanished. No wreck has ever been found. No remains were ever recovered. But the story of her final fight, one cargo ship against one submarine in the darkest moment of the Atlantic War, still stands as a testament to the deadly game of cat and mouse that determined the fate of nations in 1942, and to the men who sailed into that darkness knowing they might never return.